So bro, my attention span used to be trash. It got to the point where I pretty much stopped going to lectures in university completely. Because, look, I'd go to a lecture, and for about 15 minutes, I'd follow along with the lecture. I'd be like, yeah, bro, I'm understanding, everything's making sense for about 15 minutes. And then after about 15 minutes, I'd start like daydreaming, start thinking about random shit like, oh, what am I gonna eat for dinner tonight? You know, my mind would go elsewhere. And you know, in a lecture, like everything kind of connects to everything else. So if you get lost for like 5 minutes in a lecture, you're lost for the rest of the class because you come back and you have no idea what's going on. So honestly, for about 80% of the subjects in university, I didn't go to lectures. Like the kids in my class would be like, bro, why don't you go to lectures? You know, I would always skip lectures. I'd never go to them. And I'd be like, yeah, bro, I'm a genius. I don't need to go to lectures. But the reality is I just couldn't pay attention in the lectures. Like the kids in my class, they would literally download the lecture files onto their computer so they could put them onto this program called VLC so that they could play the lectures at 3 times speed. Bro, they were playing their lectures on 3 times speed because 1 time speed wasn't fast enough for them. And here I was sitting in real life on a 1 time speed lecture and it was too fast for me. I was struggling to understand. It took me about like an hour and a half to cover a 1-hour lecture at home. So I was very much struggling with this attention span problem. I thought I had like ADHD or something. Like I would read the textbook, I would read books, and I would just like keep repeating the same paragraph over and over again because I'd realized I was reading it, but I wasn't processing it. So I thought, okay, my attention span is screwed. Maybe I should get like a medication or something. But I realized that I could actually pay attention. For example, I loved learning languages. I loved learning Chinese. I loved learning languages. I could pay attention for like 2 hours when I was learning languages. I could pay attention for hours when I was playing a video game or something. So I realized it wasn't exactly an attention span focus problem. It was something else. And luckily I figured it out and I got to the point where I was studying maybe like 2 hours maximum per day in engineering. And I still graduated with an A average because my focus got to the point where it was so intense that I didn't need to do much work. So first of all, you have to understand what exactly focus is. So focus is basically when you have all your attention on a given task. So there's always going to be distractions happening around you. Like there's always going to be like, people running around you. There's going to be like random objects in your peripheral vision. And focus is just your ability to be immune to those things and keep your attention on the task at hand. Like right now, there's like a fan going off in the corner there. Someone just dropped something outside. There's stuff going on all around me, but I'm still fully focused on recording this video because I'm immune to what's going on. And there's this book called Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Very, very interesting book. Basically what focus is it's a flow state. A flow state is when you are fully engaged with the task at hand, you're immune to all the distractions going on around you, and you are at peak performance. Your studying is at maximum ability. Now, there's something similar to flow state called deliberate practice, where basically if the task is very, very hard, it's not exactly flow state, it's deliberate practice. But the concept is very similar. It's still about being immune to distractions. So here's the thing though, here's the thing you have to realize. There's not just one kind of distraction. So those distractions I talked about earlier, like your phone going off, your friends running around, the kid running around next to you, those are external distractions. But there's actually another kind of distraction called internal distractions. So this is basically your brain will talk throughout the day. It's called thoughts, memories, imagination, whatever. And this is another form of distraction. And the common advice to focus better is like turn off all your distractions, turn off your phone, sit in a quiet room, and 100% this helps you. But the one thing that you cannot escape is your own brain talking. So that's what I want to talk about in this video, how to get your brain to stop talking so much so that you can focus better, because that's the biggest problem I had. In a lecture, there's no kids running around you, there's no distractions happening around you. The brain is the only distraction in a lecture. So why does our brain talk away? Basically, there's 3 things that I've realized that could be blocking your ability to get into flow state, to focus at 100% capacity. So the first one is kind of the obvious one. It's the one I talked about earlier. It's external distractions. So, this is like very common advice. Turn off your phone, put it onto airplane mode. The thing is, most students don't do this. They don't even turn off their phone. They don't even sit somewhere quiet, and they wonder why they always get distracted. So this is the first thing. If you're constantly looking at the people walking around you, like when I sat in the library, I would always be looking at the people around me. If my phone was blowing up, I'd always be looking at my phone. So that's the first thing. Turn off those distractions. Music. Even if there's these distractions going on around you, okay, sure, if you turn off all these distractions, if you sit in a quiet room, if you turn off your phone, it's going to be much easier for you to get into flow state, for you to focus. But you can still focus with this stuff going on around you. Like yesterday, I sat in a pretty busy area of the library and I could still focus, because it's not just about getting rid of the distractions around you. And sometimes we don't have that option. We have to, study in class, we have to do all these things. So sometimes there will always be distractions around us. But a flow state is just being immune to the distractions happening around you, which is still possible. I'll talk about that now in this next section. Now, obviously, get rid of those things as much as possible. But there is one thing I want to talk about. Often these distractions happening will be transient. So what that means is you'll be distracted for like 20 minutes, but if you just keep putting your attention back onto your work, eventually your brain will realize that you're not trying to focus on that kid over there. You're not trying to focus on that random blue light over there, and you're trying to focus on the task at hand. So your brain will naturally turn those things off from your attention. So sometimes you do just have to be patient and wait. It's like a warm-up. You do have to just keep focusing on the thing you're doing, and eventually you will be immune to those distractions around you. But the next two things are much, much bigger, because look, in a classroom, there's no distractions happening around you. When you're at home sitting, facing your wall, there's no distractions happening around you. But I will still daydream. I will still think about random stuff. So I think these next two ones are much bigger. Okay, so the next blocker that could prevent you from getting into flow state is the challenge of the task could be too difficult. So the book Flow talks about one of the requirements to actually get into flow state is that your skill must match the challenge that you're doing. So imagine a tennis player playing tennis. If he is trying to get into flow state to play tennis, he needs to be playing an opponent that's his level, or slightly better or slightly worse. If the opponent is too good, he's gonna really struggle playing, and he's gonna be anxious, and he's not gonna be able to focus and be in flow state. Or if the opponent is too easy, it's gonna be boring. He's not gonna be in flow state because it's gonna be too easy. So you might not be able to focus because what you're working on might be too difficult. This used to happen to me with a lot of engineering subjects. They were very conceptually difficult, and I struggled to focus and sit down and focus because I could not understand the concepts. They were just so difficult that I would struggle to focus and get into flow state. And I'll talk about that right now. Basically, you might be thinking oh bro, but I have to do this subject. I can't do an easier subject. This subject is gonna be this difficulty. Okay, fair enough. Maybe you're stuck with this subject. But there are ways to make the subject easier. You might be approaching it in the wrong way. So one of the reasons why I couldn't focus when I was trying to learn these difficult engineering and math subjects was because I was just going too fast. I was speeding through. I was trying to understand everything. What you need to do is you need to understand that learning, your ability to learn, is a skill. The more you spend time learning, the better you will get at it. And so one of the problems that students do is they get very, very frustrated. They're like, oh, I'm not understanding this process. It's very, very frustrating. It's very, very annoying. But what they don't realize is that's part of the learning process. Think about, for example, Thomas Edison when he was inventing the light bulb. He didn't get frustrated that he couldn't figure out the light bulb because he was learning. He was figuring out how a light bulb works for the first time. Now, I don't know if he was the one who invented it. It might be Nikola Tesla or something. I don't know the history behind it, but this is just an example I'm using. I think Thomas Edison made 1,000 versions of the light bulb. Can you imagine if he made that first light bulb and he got frustrated and he gave up because it wasn't working? He didn't give up. He kept pushing because he understood that this is the learning process. You got to make a bunch of mistakes. You got to have points where you don't understand. You're going to have points where you struggle. So if you're struggling to focus because the subject is too difficult, then the first thing I can tell you is you need to slow down. So I got to the point where I slowed down. I paused the lectures literally. I would make sure I understood everything that was going on. I tried to connect the dots. I tried to look for gaps in my understanding. The more you learn, the more you practice, the better you'll get at this. But basically you need to realize that not understanding, things not clicking is part of the process. Sometimes I'll try to understand a certain concept and I wouldn't understand it, so I'd go away, I'd have lunch, I'd move on with my day. I'd come back, try to understand it again. It would make sense, I wouldn't understand it. I'd go to sleep and I'd wake up the next day, I'd try to understand it again, and suddenly it would click, it would make sense. Because sometimes you just need to give your brain time to understand the thing. Sometimes go away and come back to the thing. Focus on a different topic, focus on a different subject, and you come back to it and you'll understand. One of the concepts of ultra learning, which is like learning things very, very fast, is repetition. You need to repeat the same things over and over again. Like, people who learn languages understand that you never learn a word on your first time seeing it. You often have to see a word in context like 10 times, 20 times, till it clicks and the word makes sense to you. So sometimes you just have to go away from the concepts and keep coming back. But the point is, slow down. Make sure you're actually like understanding what's going on underneath instead of just kind of memorizing it. So if you do this, you're much more likely to get into flow state. It's going to be more enjoyable and you're going to focus better. So another requirement of ultra learning, of flow state, is feedback. So a tennis player, when they hit the ball, they get instant feedback. They know if they've made it over the net. They know if they've made it into the court. And sometimes with subjects, you don't get feedback because you're just like learning. You're just reading and reading and reading. So what you need to do is you need to constantly be testing yourself. You need to constantly like see, are you understanding what's going on? So that means you could do questions and stuff. Like, I learned this from the scientist Andrew Huberman. The best way to learn is to test yourself. Like, I won't go too much into this, but basically, even if you're getting questions wrong, if you're testing yourself, even asking yourself questions in your own mind, like, okay, do I understand this? Am I understanding what's going on? You learn much better than just constantly rereading the same things over and over again. So if you're constantly testing yourself, if you're constantly looking for gaps in your knowledge, if you're constantly like seeing how things connect, not only is it more enjoyable and you're much more likely to get into flow state, but it gives you that feedback that's required to actually get into flow state in the first place. So another requirement with flow state that relates to this, like the task being too difficult, is for flow state, you need a goal. So in tennis, your goal is to, defeat the opponent. So I always have a goal when I study. I don't just kind of like mindlessly try to understand the concepts. My goal might be to do this past paper. So I talked about it in the video, how to study so fast, something like that. Basically, start with the end. Start with the past paper and learn what you need to be able to do the past paper questions. When you have a goal in your mind, when you're learning to be able to answer those specific questions, you're like a hunter when you learn. You're like a hunter looking for things that will connect to that question, if that makes sense. So, for example, if you're learning video editing, one approach you could do is like read a book on video editing and then go try to edit videos. But the better approach would be to have a video to edit. And as you're editing the video, learn, and when you find something that you're learning that you can apply it. Learn, apply. So if you have a goal, something you're working towards, you're much more likely to get into flow state as well. This is the mistake students make. They'll start on chapter 1, they'll understand chapter 1, then chapter 2, then 3, then 4, then they'll start doing past papers. But the real way to do it that I've realized from learning from all these different sources is to actually start with the past paper. Have the past paper in front of you and learn to be able to do the past paper. Or for example, if I had a coding assignment, I would read the coding assignment, read the specification, read the question that I had to do, and I would learn the material to be able to do the question. This is another principle of ultra learning that I talked about, learning things fast. It's the principle of directness. You need direct experience to be able to learn something. For example, if you're learning a language, it's not enough to just memorize thousands of words, memorize thousands of grammar patterns, because if you do that and you start listening to native speakers, you realize you have no idea what they're saying. You realize you won't be able to converse with them because you need direct experience. You have to actually listen to like the language being spoken. You have to actually speak the language. So in this case, direct experience is the assessments you're going to do. It's questions, it's assignments. So have a goal and you're much more likely to get into flow state. And if it's still too hard what you're doing, then maybe you're missing some of the foundational concepts. Like I remember there was a subject I did last year called power system analysis, something like that. And I was struggling to understand week 1. And I realized it's because I didn't understand the fundamentals of a prerequisite subject, which was foundations of power or something like that. And so when I went back and I learned those fundamentals, suddenly things started making sense. So in a subject, in a degree, everything connects. This is what learning is. Learning is like making connections to previous things that you knew. Like I mentioned 3 books in this video. So this idea of focus connects to these concepts that I learned in all these different books. So when you're learning a subject, it doesn't exist on its own. It exists as a connection to a bunch of different other domains, and it exists as a connection with other topics within that subject. So if you're not understanding the fundamentals of what you're learning, the topic you're learning, that might be preventing you from understanding it. Maybe you don't have the fundamentals. Okay, so this is the third thing that might be blocking you from getting into flow state. In my opinion, this is the biggest one. If you can unlock this, this is big. So, honestly, in high school, I didn't know what focus was. I didn't know there was such thing as flow state. I didn't know what focus was. I didn't know you could take cold showers or, distractions. I didn't know what any of that was. Yet I managed to very easily sit down and focus for hours at a time. I would be on the bus with kids screaming around me. The bus was literally bumping. I was very uncomfortable. And I could still study for like an hour on the bus. Or I'd wake up at 4 a.m., no problem, and focus for 2 hours. And the reason is because of this third thing that I'm going to mention. In my opinion, the ultimate way to get into flow state is intrinsic motivation. So what does this mean? This means if you genuinely, are motivated to do the thing, you're much more likely to just sit down and focus. Like, consider, for example, let's say LeBron James. I don't know much about him, but I'm going to guess here. I think he woke up at like 4 a.m. to play basketball because he genuinely enjoyed it. He was like excited to go into the court and play basketball. How can you beat someone who intrinsically is motivated to do the thing? So if you can cultivate an intrinsic motivation for your studies, you're much more likely to focus. This is pretty much for anything in your life. So it might seem a bit wishy-washy or whatever, but I'll talk about this now. Because what flow state is flow state is essentially enjoying the process itself. So you're not playing tennis because you want to win. Like, you do want to win, but you're playing tennis because you intrinsically love the process of actually playing tennis. So if you can learn to love the process of studying, then you'll enjoy it a lot more and you'll be much more likely to get into flow state. For example, I always hear that like people have an attention span problem these days, and I used to think that too. But I started thinking about it. Most people these days, they can sit down and they can binge watch like a Netflix season. They have no trouble doing that, but they can't sit down and focus for 5 minutes. It's because when it comes to Netflix, they are intrinsically motivated. They love the task for the task itself. They're not watching Netflix with the goal of like, yeah, I'm gonna flex that I watched this entire season. They're watching it because they genuinely love it. So I talk about this in this video, how to enjoy studying or whatever, but I'll give you a couple other insights here. Basically, most students are not intrinsically motivated to study. They are extrinsically motivated. Their motivations are external. For example, it's like, oh, bro, I got to study because my teacher told me to study. I got to study because I want to get good grades to impress my parents. I want to study so I can get good grades. That's another big one. I want to study, to beat all the kids in my class. I want to study so the girl in my class likes me. Not gonna lie, I had a lot of these extrinsic motivations as well. I wanted to destroy the kids in my class. I wanted to impress the girls in my class. By the way, this shit doesn't work. Nobody cares. But I was very extrinsically motivated as well. But I had both. I had extrinsic motivation. I had intrinsic motivation. And I've been thinking about this recently. Like, how do we motivate ourselves? Like, is motivation overrated? Is discipline better? What should we do here? And I think that having a balance of intrinsic motivation, genuinely loving the thing you're doing, and extrinsic motivation, getting good grades, beating your competition, whatever, I think that's it's good to utilize everything that you have. So if you do genuinely want to beat the kids in your class, fair enough. But if you can unlock this intrinsic motivation, not only will the task become more enjoyable, but you'll focus without thinking about it. Like in high school, when I was focusing for hours at a time, I didn't need discipline. I didn't even know what discipline meant. I just genuinely wanted to sit down and focus because I enjoyed it. So you need to understand that you can develop this curiosity, this love for learning. You can literally develop it. It's like a skill. You can learn to love anything. This is what I've realized. Because as humans, we're naturally driven to be curious. We naturally are driven to love learning. Because I've been reading this book recently called The Art of Impossible, I think. It talks about like how peak performers perform. And it talks about motivation, how they are intrinsically motivated. So when we have our survival needs met, we're eating well, we're having sex well, we're drinking water well or whatever, humans will naturally want to explore the world. They want, like, when a tribe has all their needs met, they're going to be curious about distant lands. They're going to want to expand their territory. They're going to become curious. So humans naturally, if their survival needs are met and everything, they naturally become curious about anything. Humans will become curious about the world around them. So you need to have an open mind and realize that you can become curious about learning anything. And you have to cultivate that curiosity yourself. Because like I said, if you can develop that curiosity, that is the competitive advantage that will help you destroy your competition in your career, in your studies. imagine you're that guy who wakes up to study not because you're super disciplined, but because you genuinely are excited to do it. Because if you're genuinely curious for something, it releases a bunch of dopamine. And when you release a bunch of dopamine, that's the molecule needed to focus better. That's the molecule needed to improve your memory. So actually curiosity. This is what this book talks about, how one of the intrinsic motivators is curiosity. You need to develop the curiosity for a subject, and it can honestly come from anything. You can be curious about anything. Like I saw this podcast where it talked about like, you know, a way how you can find curiosity in anything. Wait, let me just check that this is still playing. So basically, the one guy told the other guy, okay, please rake these leaves for me, like rake the leaves on my driveway. And then he said, okay, rate your enjoyment of that task of raking the leaves out of 10. And the guy was like, oh, 3 out of 10. It was okay. And then the other guy asked him, okay, you said raking the leaves was a 3 out of 10. Why was it not a 0 out of 10? Why a 3? Why not a 0? And then his brain starts thinking. He's like, okay, raking the leaves, I was one with nature. I was like, I was out in the great sunlight. It was very relaxing. I loved the satisfying feeling of the leaves being cleared from the driveway. I love that crunchy sound. It's very satisfying. So essentially, he had taken this task that he thought he hated, but because of that question, he found things that he enjoyed about it. Now, I'm not saying like, you can enjoy, washing the dishes and find it as fun as playing video games. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, we're always focused on why we hate a subject. We're always focused on what sucks about it. But if we move our attention to what we love about it, then you can learn to cultivate a love for it. Essentially, you can gaslight yourself to enjoying anything, really. Like, I used to hate English. I thought like, oh, bro, I'm not an English person. I hate it. I hate reading books. I hate watching plays. Like, oh, the author says the curtains are blue because it represents his sadness. Like, I don't give a shit about this. I'm not wired to enjoy this kind of stuff. And then it got to a point where I was like, I don't know what happened, but it clicked in me. And I was like, wait a minute. This is beautiful. Like, plays are this beautiful creation of mankind where he's taken these like words, these metaphors and everything, and he's blended it in a nice way to make language beautiful. This play, this is a story that, we can all relate to because it brings you through an emotional experience and helps you realize like a transformation that the person was going through. And I don't know how to explain this, but I started enjoying the process of learning literature on its own. Like, I would get so excited to learn. I'd literally love it. I'd literally like jump out of my seat when I understood like a mind-blowing concept in maths. I would literally like, bro, this is why I like studying on my own, because I would literally walk around the room talking to myself, trying to understand the concepts out loud. I'd be like a scientist, like talking out loud. I'd be like, okay, so, the integral is the sum of the different infinitesimally small parts under the function. I'd talk aloud for like a crazy person. I'd be curious, learning the subject, rather than asking constant questions, rather than just learning it to, get the mark, to get this extrinsic benefit or whatever. So I hope this video gave you some insights to focus better. But by the way, if you want my personal help to help you develop a deep work habit, destroy your procrastination, and be able to actually sit down and focus every single day, and I'm going to help you very, very intensely. I'm going to keep you accountable to help you build this study habit and get to the point where you don't even have to worry about it ever again. You're not going to waste hours a day procrastinating. You're going to actually be up to date with your work, and you're going to carry this skill of deep work, this ability to focus, the correct study techniques. You're going to carry this skill for the rest of your life. If you want me to help you personally to do this, check out the first link in the description. Just give it a click and see what you think. See you later.